Commander Pierre de Moria is living a sailor's worst nightmare as his lone corvette. The Free French FFL Lelia sails through the cold Atlantic night. The vessel stands as the sole shield between a relentless pack of German U-boats and the vulnerable ships of Convoy SC-118. Two vessels have already been torn apart by enemy torpedoes, their crews swallowed by the unforgiving sea, and still the attackers press forward without hesitation. De Moria knows that the survival of the entire convoy depends on his decisions, and with calm determination he orders his men to execute a daring and complex defensive maneuver. The crew obeys with precision, steering the corvettes through a deadly storm of torpedoes. Lelia moves like a predator herself, twisting and turning in ways that few ships of her size could manage. Each movement blocking an attack, each evasive maneuver buying the convoy precious seconds. Years of German dominance at sea seemed to shatter in that moment, for the U-boats had long ruled these waters unchallenged, striking fear into all who sailed them, but now they face something unexpected. De Moria has been armed with new knowledge, the product of secret and innovative minds working far from the battlefront. These tactics, born in hidden rooms and tested through careful simulation, are being put into practice for the first time. And as the Lelia weaves through the chaos, the German wolfpack learns that their prey has teeth. No longer are Allied ships helpless targets adrift in the Atlantic, for the tide of battle is beginning to turn. The fall of France in May 1940 had left Britain standing alone against a nightmare that few thought could be resisted. The German blitzkrieg had swallowed nations with shocking speed, overrunning Central and Eastern Europe in mere months. By summer's end, the Atlantic had become a vast hunting ground where German submarines prowled like wolves beneath the waves, fresh from their victories in Norway, eager to cut Britain's lifeline to the world. The Royal Navy, though proud and vast, found itself overwhelmed by the precision and coordination of this new threat. Each convoy that ventured out carried food, fuel, and weapons essential to Britain's survival. But those same convoys became irresistible targets. The U-boats hunted in packs, coordinating attacks that tore through defenses, leaving chaos in their wake. Convoy SC-7 fell early, a massacre in the dark waters as torpedoes slammed into merchant hulls, breaking them apart and dragging crews down into the icy depths. More than half the convoy was destroyed before the Navy could mount an effective response. Before the shock of that disaster could fade, Convoy HX-79 suffered a similar fate. The British escorts fought bravely but failed to sink even a single enemy submarine. Despite their early sonar systems, they could not hold contact with the U. In stormy seas or at higher speeds, the fragile technology was nearly useless, and time after time, the hunters slipped through the gaps, striking with ruthless precision. The scale of these disasters shook even Winston Churchill, who would later admit that the U-boat peril was the only thing during the war that truly frightened him. Karl Dönitz, the mastermind behind Germany's submarine campaign, had crafted a chilling vision. He believed that with a fleet of just 300 U-boats, he could bring Britain to its knees without setting foot on her soil. By sinking merchant ships faster than they could be replaced, he would strangle the nation's supply lines, starve its people, and force surrender from within. Britain's very survival was now tied to the ability to break the stranglehold of the wolfpacks. The answer began in an unexpected place. In early 1942, Captain Gilbert Roberts, a naval officer forced into retirement by illness, was recalled for an unusual mission. He was to lead a small and untested group whose purpose was not to fight at sea but to outthink the enemy. From an unremarkable building near Liverpool's town hall, in a fortified basement safe from air raids, the Western Approach's tactical unit took shape. Known simply as WATU, it was a unit unlike any other. Built on the belief that careful study and inventive thinking could save ships and lives, skeptics in the Navy scoffed at the idea that battles could be won from behind desks. But Roberts and his team were determined to prove otherwise. His staff was composed largely of women from the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Wrens, some as young as 17. They were tasked with mastering the intricacies of anti-submarine warfare, learning skills and concepts that would have challenged seasoned officers, What they lacked in experience, they made up for in determination, intellect, and the ability to learn quickly. Day by day, the Wrens trained themselves to think like hunters, and hunted alike. They studied every detail of German attacks, examined every report from the Atlantic, and tested theories on vast maps, where model ships played out battles across the floor. They discovered flaws in existing tactics, weaknesses that no one at sea had recognized, and step by step they built new strategies to counter the wolf packs. In that basement, the future of the Atlantic War was being reshaped. When skeptical Royal Navy officers were brought to WATU to see this new approach for themselves, they entered a room dominated by a massive tactical table. The floor transformed into a living chart. The officers were separated from the action by large canvas screens, allowed only a restricted view of the unfolding war games, just as a real captain at sea would see only fragments of the battle. On the other side of the screens, the Wrens tracked EO boat movements with colored markers invisible to the observers, forcing them to confront the same uncertainty sailors faced in the Atlantic. The Wrens calculated ship speeds, sonar ranges, torpedo arcs, and performance limitations with meticulous accuracy. They created a world of cat and mouse, where the Navy officers played the role of convoy escorts, making decisions under pressure while the unseen enemy closed in. Each mistake cost them imaginary ships. Each success revealed a tactic that could be carried to sea. In those hidden rooms, the balance of the war began to shift. What started as a small experiment with model ships and chalk marks grew into a revolution in naval warfare. The U-boats were still out there, relentless and deadly. But for the first time, the Allies had a weapon of their own. Knowledge sharpened into strategy, tested in countless games, and ready to be unleashed upon the open sea. The men at the front would no longer fight blind. They carried with them the lessons of WATU, born in silence and secrecy, but destined to change the fate of the Atlantic battle. The wargames designed by the Western Approach's tactical unit were unlike anything the Royal Navy had seen before. Sailors were thrust into situations that stripped away the comfort of certainty, forcing them to think and react as if they were truly at sea with lives and cargo on the line. The officers participating were given only the information they could realistically have in battle: their ship's course, speed, radar readings, and tactical intentions. The U-boat positions, however, were carefully hidden from them, mimicking the real-life danger of fighting an unseen enemy beneath the waves. After officers submitted their written orders, the Wrens moved quickly and efficiently across the giant tactical table, calculating every outcome with precision and marking the new positions of ships and submarines. The exercise gave immediate feedback. Every order carried consequences. If the officers made a poor decision, they lost ships. If they hesitated, surprise attacks punished them. Miscommunications spread confusion and sometimes led to entire convoys being wiped out on the board. Slowly, officers who had once doubted the value of the training began to see its brilliance. They realized that the controlled chaos of the room was the closest possible mirror to the terror and unpredictability of the Atlantic battlefield. Among the most shocking discoveries of these exercises was the realization that German U-boat tactics had advanced dramatically since the First World War, under the cunning leadership of Karl Dönitz. The submarines no longer confined themselves to attacking the edges of convoys as their predecessors had done. Instead, they mastered the art of infiltration. Taking advantage of darkness and weather, they slipped through the outer defenses unnoticed, glided into the heart of the convoy, and unleashed sudden, devastating strikes before submerging and disappearing into the vast black ocean. These tactics made traditional convoy defense methods obsolete, and the Royal Navy was losing ships at a rate that Britain could not sustain. The Western Approach's tactical unit knew they had to respond quickly and with creativity. Their answer was the Raspberry Maneuver, a counterattack plan that turned chaos into coordinated action. When a torpedo struck, any escort could instantly fire to white rockets into the sky and call out Raspberry over the radio. Forward escorts would immediately launch star shells, flooding the night with bright light that exposed lurking submarines, while escorts from the rear and flanks surged inward at full speed to sweep the waters. The maneuver was designed to box in the U-boats and leave them with no room to escape. This was only the beginning. WATU began developing a whole arsenal of tactics, each tailored to different situations. With names like banana and pineapple, these maneuvers combined precisely timed rocket launches, star shells, and patterned sonar sweeps, creating overlapping fields of detection that made it nearly impossible for U-boats to hide. Convoys of varying sizes could now be protected more effectively, and escort commanders had a range of tools at their disposal to adapt to the fluid nature of submarine warfare. In August 1942, these tactics were tested in the Battle of Convoy 012. For the first time, sailors at sea executed the drills they had practiced on WATU's tactical floor. The results stunned even hardened officers. As the Germans attacked, escorts moved with a new confidence, performing the raspberry maneuver exactly as designed. One officer later described it with pride, saying it was a pleasure to hear the Norwegians cry, "Tally-ho" in the night, for he knew at once that a U-boat was being hunted down. The theory born in Liverpool had become lethal practice on the Atlantic waves. The following months tested the system further. In early 1943, Convoy SC-118 came under fierce assault in the North Atlantic. US-62 and U-413 launched torpedoes that struck two merchant freighters, to Glober and West Portal, inflicting heavy losses. The rear of the convoy was dangerously exposed, with only the Free French corvette FFL Lilia covering the sector. Commander Pierre de Maurier, who had recently graduated from WATU's Liverpool courses, suddenly found himself alone against a pack of German hunters. In that critical moment, he drew upon everything he had learned in training. He imagined the dark and icy Atlantic not as a vast and hopeless expanse, but as the tactical flaw he had studied in Liverpool. Every move of the enemy became a calculation he had already rehearsed. He ordered an immediate rearguard action, directing his men with clarity and resolve. Lilia engaged multiple U-boats in a desperate battle, launching depth charges with relentless determination. Over 180 charges were deployed as the small corvette fought to protect the convoy. The crew worked tirelessly, anticipating enemy movements, countering torpedo runs, and dodging salvo after salvo. De Maurier seemed to know what the U-boats would attempt before they even made their moves, an ability born from long hours of war games back in Liverpool. At last, after dodging several attacks, Lilia managed to strike back decisively, landing a blow on U-69. The battle was brutal, but it marked a turning point. Though the convoy suffered losses, the U-boats had been denied an easy victory. For the first time in the war, a single escort vessel had stood firm against multiple submarines and emerged, not only intact, but victorious. It was proof that WATU's methods worked in the chaos of real combat. Dunnits could not ignore what was happening. The Allies were learning, adapting, and growing more dangerous with every passing month. No longer were convoys helpless prey. In May 1943, Commander Peter Gretton took charge of Convoy SC-1, a mission fraught with difficulty because many of the convoy's smoke-belching ships betrayed their position to prowling U. As if the odds were not already stacked against them, the convoy had to navigate past an iceberg shrouded in dense fog. Yet even in these treacherous conditions, new tools and tactics turned the tide. Gretton's team detected enemy signals using HFDF, known as Huff-Duff, a system capable of pinpointing U-boat radio transmissions almost instantly. Armed with this intelligence, Gretton moved without hesitation. Instead of reacting defensively, his escorts launched a coordinated counteroffensive, closing in on the submarines before they could mount their full attack. The U-boats found themselves hunted in a way they had never been before. Each time they tried to maneuver into position, the escorts were already there, cutting them off. Each time they attempted to retreat, they found paths blocked by relentless destroyers and corvettes. Gretton's team applied the lessons of WATU with confidence, moving as one, responding as if they had rehearsed the battle 100 times. What had begun in a quiet basement in Liverpool now echoed across the North Atlantic as a force the Germans could not overcome. The wolf packs that had once terrorized the sea were discovering that the hunters had become the hunted, and the battle of the Atlantic was shifting in favor of the Allies. Using the creeping attack method, the escorts carefully guided depth charges in a slow and deliberate pattern that left no room for the submarine to evade, and almost immediately, U-381 was struck and forced into retreat. The attack sent shockwaves through the enemy wolfpack, and the furious U-boats regrouped, determined to smash through the defenses. Soon 3 submarines closed in at once, testing the convoy's strength and discipline. A crewman on Gretton's flagship turned to him in the middle of the chaos and quipped, half nervously, half defiantly, that, as Mae West once said, "One at a time, gentlemen please." But the pressure did not relent. Reports soon indicated that as many as 30 U-boats prowled in the darkness surrounding the convoy, like a ring of predators waiting for a single opening. Commander Peter Gretton had to coordinate the most flawless defense of his career, and he relied on every lesson WATU had drilled into him. Escorts and aircraft were positioned with careful precision, constantly adapting to shifting threats. As sonar readings flickered with danger, the wolfpack darted in from multiple directions, their torpedoes slicing the water in deadly streaks, but Gretton's tactical mastery kept the formation intact. Escorts raced to intercept the attacks, hurling depth charges in thunderous blasts that shook the sea, while gunners poured fire into the shadows. The convoy twisted and turned with the escorts forming a living shield around it, dodging torpedoes by seconds and cutting off every attempt by the enemy to reach. The soft underbelly of merchant ships, the counterstrikes were relentless. Shellfire and depth charges churned the waters until finally, 3 U-boats were destroyed, their crews forced to abandon the hunt. Yet the danger was not over. Radio intelligence confirmed another wolfpack closing in, and Gretton knew that pressing on risked annihilation. With a calm but firm order, he changed course, pulling the convoy away before the enemy could reorganize. The decision saved the fleet, and by the time the battle ended, not a single merchant ship had been lost. Even Carl Dunitz would later admit in his memoirs that the Allied convoy escorts and the support groups trained with WATU's methods had become far too disciplined and deadly to be considered easy prey. As the tide of the war shifted, the demands on WATU grew. In early 1944, with the greatest operation of the war approaching, Captain Gilbert Roberts was summoned to the Royal Navy's highest command. Operation Overlord would bring hundreds of thousands of men across the Channel, and the U-boat threat could not be allowed to break that lifeline. For 6 weeks, Roberts and his small staff worked around the clock, devising a layered defense. They mapped out shallow water patrol patterns. Where submarines might try to lurk, they perfected tight escort formations. To seal every gap, they tested sonar sweeps to drive U-boats from their attack positions, and they designed preemptive strike tactics to hit the enemy before the enemy could hit them. The work was carried into the headquarters, where the final details of the invasion were being refined. Inside a crowded room of generals, admirals, and statesmen, Winston Churchill, Dwight Eisenhower, Charles de Gaulle, and even King George VI gathered to hear the plans. Admiral Sir Max Horton was asked by the King what would be done about the submarines, and Horton replied that Roberts would answer. Stepping forward, Roberts unrolled the plan in his own unmistakable style. The floor was painted with a map of the Channel, just like the warboards the Wrens had used back in Liverpool. He walked the leaders through the routes the convoys would take, the points of greatest danger, and the way each escort group would react. Every move was coordinated with depth charges, sonar patterns, and decoys to trick the enemy. Silence filled the room as the enormity of the defense became clear. At the end, the King simply said, "Thank you." On June 6, 1944, the plan was put to the ultimate test. The English Channel erupted with the largest seaborne invasion in history. Over 160,000 Allied troops surged toward the fortified beaches of Normandy there. Landing craft packed tightly in lines that stretched across the horizon. German defenses bristled with mines, wooden stakes, barbed wire, and artillery, while beneath the surface, U-boats prowled, waiting to strike. But this time the Allies were ready. The escort ships moved like a single living organism, armed with the methods Roberts had given them. They surged into action, keeping tight formations that confused enemy targeting. They hurled depth charges with punishing accuracy, forcing submarines to dive deep and lose their attack positions. Starshells lit the night sky, exposing periscopes and conning towers, while radar and sonar pounded the seas with constant sweeps. Every time a U-boat attempted to close in, it was met with a wall of steel depth charges and gunfire. By the end of D-Day, the wolfpacks had been broken, and the Allies had secured all 5 beachheads, opening the path into France. In the aftermath of the invasion, Captain Roberts received recognition for his extraordinary role. He was awarded the title of Commander of the British Empire, and his work at WATU was formally credited with helping to turn the tide of the war at sea. The unit itself continued its quiet labor training officers, refining techniques and innovating new responses to the ever-changing threat until the war ended. By that time, nearly 5,000 officers had passed through its doors, each carrying with them the lessons that had kept convoys alive and ensured supplies reached Europe. When WATU was finally disbanded, Admiral Horton sent a message to its members, expressing his gratitude and declaring that their efforts had contributed, in no small measure, to the defeat of Germany. What had begun as a small group with painted boards, model ships, and the determination of Roberts and his Wrens had grown into one of the most effective tactical schools of the war. Their ideas had traveled from basement floors to the English Channel, and from training exercises to the liberation of a continent, leaving behind a legacy of ingenuity, courage, and victory.